Fathers, if you're struggling to connect with your son or desire to strengthen your bond, here's a great opportunity. The Royal Hood Father and Son Camp is a bonding experience like no other, hosted by Eric Argerman in partnership with Dr. Alan Meyer from Valiant Man. Empower your son for manhood through unforgettable memories and faith-filled moments that will define his future. Secure your place for April 7 to 9 at CYC Adventure Resort, Phillip Island. Visit fatherandssoncamp.com.
Towards Understanding with Clayton Bielen values being a positive radio program for everyone. As we present today's episode, please accept this little ears warning. Some of the themes discussed may not be suitable for children.
I almost feel like I need to run James Bond music or some sort of Mission Impossible music, because my guest today is a real-life hero. Not with Hollywood green screens, but with hard work, determination, and changing lives for the better. We're not even going to use his actual name. The reason we can't is because he's busting up child trafficking rings around our world. And if his name actually gets out, that work would stop. In the various parts of the world that he's working, if they know his name, it would mean that that whole scheme that's been worked on for years to bust all these kids out of this trafficking ring won't happen. We don't want to be a part of that. We want to champion this work, definitely not put anything that might stop it in its place. So Investigator V is what we're going to call our guest today from International Justice Mission. We're going to be hearing today about how it has the plans, the ideas of it, the actual work that happens, and how then they care for kids after they've been trafficked and are now free again. If you love this program, even as you listen to it, as perhaps you finish it, I've got to share it with someone, please do. Like, subscribe. It's all for free, but it helps us get these stories out to more people. We absolutely want to do that and change this world together as we all head towards a better understanding. Let's get stuck into this interview with Investigator V. It is wonderful to welcome to the program from International Justice Mission, Investigator V. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Now, let's talk a little bit about what is International Justice Mission.
Well, International Justice Mission is a large group of people that care about injustice in the world, slavery, human trafficking, oppression, and violence, the bullies in the world. Yeah. And IJM is lawyers, social workers, investigators, professional people who all have a heart and a passion to fight injustice around the world, especially in areas where it seems so broken and so unreachable.
Yeah. Now, the reason we can't use your actual real name is because you are still an investigator in the field around the world, and that's just going to put you in danger. That's going to put those who you're working with in danger as well, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we have an enemy in all this, and our enemy is cunning and deceiving, and criminals like to seek us out. So we're trying to protect ourselves somewhat and still do an effective job.
Yeah. You talked about we Investigator V here. So yeah. V, in terms of what is the actual role of an investigator in IJM? Could you give us a bit more details on that?
Sure, absolutely. The investigators we train and we seek out and we hire are men and women typically within the countries where we work, national staff, who we train to go out and gather information. And it's hard because they have to go into areas that are controlled by criminal elements. They have to go into brothels, into brick kilns where slaves are held, onto the lakes in some of the countries where slave boys are enslaved. They have to be able to fit into that environment and collect data. At the same time, they can't just tell people, I'm here to rescue and help rescue. They have to do it in an undercover capacity. Yeah. So it has to be a man or a woman who can think at two levels at the same time, gather information, and somewhat not be affected by that world they're in, but act like they're a part of it.
Yeah. Tell me if you're not allowed to tell me, but what are some of the key countries you've worked in?
I've done investigations in 14 different countries. A lot of the extensive ones are in Ghana, the west coast of Africa, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, for example. Also, India, 4 different offices in India, Philippines, Cambodia, Romania. There's a few others along the way, but...
Yeah, we're going to talk about how the investigations actually work and a bit of how the rescuing of people who are enslaved in whatever way it may be. It might be in sexual slavery. It might be just in slavery of working, servitude, whatever else it might be. We'll talk a bit more about that, but I'd love to hear a bit more of your story about how you even got to this point. We do notice a bit of an accent here too, V. So take us through, how did you even find yourself at this place? What's your background?
Well, I'm from California. I grew up and was raised in California, and come from a family where my father was a police officer, and he always told me not to be a police officer. But as things go, we make plans, and sometimes God directs our path. And so having no money for college, when I got out of high school, I joined the Marines, went in the Marine Corps, and served for 6 years, and then was offered a job in law enforcement. I got out and spent a 22-year career in law enforcement in the state of California. 10 years in the California Highway Patrol, work in the streets and work in the roads and doing drug interdictions. And then I transferred to the California Department of Justice, where I did 12 years of undercover drug investigations and drug trafficking investigations. After 4 years of that, actually I promoted to a supervisor, and I ran drug task forces. And then for 2 years was cross-sworn with our Federal Bureau of Investigation, doing very high-level police corruption cases. And then, honestly, how it all transformed into IJM is I wanted to retire as young as possible.
Right.
And in California...
Well, I can imagine going through all that you've gone through. I get why you'd want to.
Well, yeah, I wanted to retire and play golf and have fun with friends and occasionally help do some missions work maybe, or do some other work overseas. And so I was about to turn 50, which they allowed us to retire at then for a short time. And I was looking for ways of doing things, or things I could do. And IJM was actually monitoring a website that I was on, looking for jobs. And they called me out of the blue. Wow. They said, "Hey, V, this is so-and-so from IJM. We do anti-slavery work." And I said, "So what slaves?" And he told me at that time, that was late 2007, there's 27 million slaves in the world. And honestly, I think I verbally said, "No, there's not. How could that be?" I mean, I'd never heard of that before. So it really kind of rocked my world. And I was thinking about it, and he went on, and I finally, at one point, I said, "Well, what's all this have to do with me? Why are you telling me this?" And he posed this question that was a turning point in my life, really. He said, "I'm wondering, you have all this experience in drug trafficking investigations, all this knowledge. Do you think at some point when you retire, you'd be willing to come to Asia, one of our offices in Asia, and help fight sex trafficking, help train our investigators, help build up the capacity of our staff to do this work?" It was a big challenge for me because I really didn't want to go to Asia. But eventually I struggled with it, prayed about it, talked with my family, talked with friends, and it just came to be a thing that I couldn't fight or find a reason not to do it. Yeah. Even though it was counterintuitive, even though it was to a place I didn't want to go, I just saw it as a window of opportunity to do something purposeful and effective. Yeah. So I did it.
Can you take me through the family element of that? Because it's one thing for you to say, okay, well, this is, I'm going to retire from this moment of my life, and I'm going to go into this, and okay, I don't really want to do it, but I can see the value of it and me doing it. But to suddenly to take your family having to understand that journey too. Were they fully behind it? Did they have to be convinced? Were they sort of pushing you out in the front?
Great question. Here's my thought process. Honestly, when he posed the question, I told him, well, I'm going to have to think about it because I'm not sure my family's going to want to do that. And really, honestly, what I was thinking in the back of my mind is my wife's going to say no, and I won't have to do that. Seriously, we have those thoughts. But anyway, it kind of backfired on me. My wife was a missionary's kid in the Philippines. Right. And so she's always kind of had a heart to go overseas and do something. So she said, yeah, I think if that's what you want to do, I think we can make that work. And I said, do you realize it's in Asia? We're going to go live there. And so that backfired. So I said, I'm going to talk to our kids, because our kids, who were fully grown at the time and had jobs, surely they're not going to want us to move away. But they both said, Dad, you were created for this. This is perfect for you. You know how to do this.
Isn't that great?
Then I went and talked to 4 of my pastors that I know real well and several friends. And every one of them said yes. So now I'm just looking for I'm looking for an excuse not to do it. I've got to find somebody that has some common sense. Yeah. But really, it was just me trying to figure out a way out. And seeing an opportunity and a time frame. And so eventually I surrendered and went and did it.
A couple of times you sort of mentioned something to do with faith or God or something like that. Take us through, we talk often about Jesus, but we understand that there's a lot of people who don't sort of understand Jesus or Christianity as they listen here. Who is Jesus to you? And I suppose what's the impact in your world and these sorts of decisions?
Well, I'm a Christian. And I am what I would call a man of faith. I am far from perfect, but I always try and hear God's voice in my life, which is not easy all the time because I have to cut some of the other over-communicated things out. But that's kind of as I grew up and came to know a God who I believe is my God, the God of the Bible. He became someone who I always tried to live by. And so when this opportunity came up, what I really sensed is this God's nudging? Is this something God wants me to do? For me, it was an important question. And so all those things where I would talk to people and they would say, you should go do this. Well, really, I interpreted it as another factor that God is saying yes. And then I'm just looking for an opportunity to say no. And honestly, what I pictured and the thing that put me over the top in all of this was I actually pictured myself standing in front of God. Mm-hmm. And God saying, V, I've given you a career. I've given you experience. I've given you an income in retirement. I've given you a family. I've given you health. I've given you all these things. And now an opportunity came to do something meaningful, something purposeful, to save a life. I pictured myself standing in front of him and saying, no, I decided to go play golf. Yeah. And I'm not saying it was guilt. I'm saying it was the reality of having an opportunity that was meaningful. Yeah. And that's what I thought about. And that's why I said yes. It seems like it's going to be hard and difficult and terrible, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's an opportunity that I see given to me.
Yeah. What I love to ask on follow-ups on those sorts of ones is, that's fantastic. We sort of hear those stories and so often we sort of run past them. And everything turned out great and I really enjoyed it and there was no problems at all. How was the first few months? How was those first moments when you went, okay, this is actually reality now. It's not, I had the runs on the board to go and play golf. I chose not to. How was it actually,
It was a lot more challenging and difficult than I thought it would be. And I'm glad I didn't know that ahead of time because I probably would have said no. Yeah. But I went there with all my experience and my background, which I thought was really going to put me over the top and help me, and I was going to be successful, and rescued girls were going to love me, and it just didn't work out that way. Yeah. I went from a comfort zone to a culture and an environment that was completely different than what I was used to. There was no Starbucks. There was no hot coffee places. There was tea everywhere. West Bengal was largely Hindu, so there was no beef to eat. Yeah. It was just a tremendous challenge, opposite, way out of my comfort zone. And so the first several months, I really struggled, honestly. It wasn't working out. None of my experience or knowledge that I thought was so useful was really very effective. Mm. And I was just constantly struggling. And I was waking up, and some mornings I woke up literally and said, God, I don't want to be here anymore. Just get me through this day because I'm not sure this is even working. And it came to a point where that's almost exclusively what I was thinking about. And then I got to a point where I realized that that's all I was thinking about, and I had to begin to change. And so there came a time where we had an opportunity to do a big rescue for the first time. And I said, I've just got to stop thinking about my comfort and all the things that are not going right, because that's all I'm thinking about. And once I began to really focus on what God has for me to do, the purpose, the project, the people that I need to invest in, it changed everything. I stopped thinking about myself, started thinking about others and how this might affect their life. And that's when after 6 months, rescues started to happen. Yeah, right. And I began to see the purpose in all of it and the value of it all. And it had nothing to do with my training or experience, maybe a little, but mostly it was about my attitude.
Yeah, there you go. Vic, we're going to come back in a couple of minutes. We're going to talk some specific stories of some of the rescues. But can we get a few of the numbers at the start? Do you have a number of rescues that you've been involved in?
Well, I've been involved in a couple of hundred actual operations, but I don't know the exact number anymore. I stopped keeping track. But we lived in Calcutta, India for 3 years. It was under the Communist Party of India rule at the time. During that 3-year period of investigating sex trafficking, our team rescued 163 girls, and the 3 youngest were 5 years old.
Oh, boy.
When I got there in the end of 2007, the West Bengal government had anti-trafficking laws on the books for 10 years, and they had not had a single conviction in that area, not one. So our lawyers, our professional people, building relationships with the prosecutors, with the judges, training the police, it took 1.5 years, and then when we first got there, we were told we'll never get a conviction for that. But we didn't give up. We stayed in.
And is it the you were told that because of corruption that was occurring in the bureaucracy and wherever else? That's why they didn't think you'd get a conviction?
That was part of it, the corruption, and also just the lack of caring about that issue.
Right, gotcha.
And, there's a whole caste system at work and all of that, but people, quite honestly, just didn't think it would ever happen. They didn't think it would work, and they didn't think the government would ever prosecute anyone for that. Yeah. This took us a year and a half, and it was late 2009 when we got our first conviction after much training of prosecutors and helping them. And it was in all the news. It was in the news. It was on the front page of the paper in Calcutta, a city of 18 million people. Conviction for human trafficking. And it was phenomenal. It was a breakthrough. The prosecutors couldn't believe it. The judges couldn't believe it. But it happened. And since that time, the last time I checked, we've had over 40 convictions for human trafficking. Yeah. And it's, it just started with trying to get the first one done.
Yeah. And so the work of International Justice Mission is to do all of this. It's not to necessarily, go in, kick the door down and grab somebody and just, run off and sort of reverse kidnap, as it were. No, that's probably the way wrong phrase, but I think everyone understands what I mean. It's actually to build cases, to investigate, to have lawyers, so that it can go through the paths and then it's officially then done, right? But that can take time.
Oh, yeah, it takes years. Yeah. But officially, we have an end game. We have a strategy, and it's not for us to go in, rescue girls, take a bunch of pictures, look how good we are. It's to try and fundamentally transform a justice system in a country or an environment where the justice system is broken, so that not some Westerners come over there and fix it. Some Westerners come over, help for a time, and braise up people in their own country that eventually do it all, that eventually get the police to work right, get the courts to work right, get the prosecutors to prosecute the criminals who have done their crimes for so long with impunity that they don't even think it's ever going to affect them. Yeah. That's what we're trying to do, is basically go to countries where a public justice system doesn't work, usually for just about always the poor, poverty-stricken, world of 7.5 billion people, which 2/3 are living in poverty. It's easy to have a lot of slavery and oppression because you have so many people that don't have any way to fight it. Yeah. So that's kind of the end goal. Now, we use things like the rescue of the girls or the rescue of slave boys as kind of a catalyst, as casework, a lot of times just to show their police, show their governments, show their prosecutors that they can do it. It can work, that they don't have to accept the slavery of their children. Yeah. And so they want to. A lot of the citizens, honestly, they want to see that happen. Yeah. And so then we help them prosecute, because we realize that if we don't put the traffickers, the criminals, if we don't prosecute them, then it's not going to work. When perpetrators go to jail, when they're held accountable, when they go to prison, they're scared, they're cowards, and they flee, or they give up or go somewhere else. Yeah. And so we know that that's very important. Otherwise, we just go buy the girls. Yeah. But if we do that, we're just feeding the problem. Yeah. They realize that criminals would realize we make money from it, so that's not going to work. And then we have a very lofty aftercare. We also know if we rescue a 15-year-old girl, we're going to have to care for her for the next 5 years. Yeah. So it's a long-term strategy, but it's so worth it.
Absolutely. We're going to be back with Investigator V. Now, we can't say his name right now because he is currently investigating around the world, working with International Justice Mission. We're going to hear some more of these stories, really specifically to paint some of the picture of what is occurring. And I'm pretty sure already you would agree the remarkable work of International Justice Mission. That's on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
We've been sharing a bit about the work of International Justice Mission. It's about building a case in so many parts around the world, especially for those who have no chance to stand on their own 2 feet and to get people out of slavery, to go through the courts, to make sure it's ironclad before it gets there and convictions are achieved. And as you said, part of the long-term mission is to actually change these justice systems to actually care for those who they should be caring for around the world. most of the sort of the moments you've talked about have been, young girls or young boys. Is it sort of a sign that it is just, they have to be a child for you to work with? Do you work older than that? What sort of, how do you choose, I suppose, who you're going to work with?
Well, I talk a lot about children because to me they're the saddest example, but at the same time there's also plenty of adults that we help, that we rescue. And it's not always youth. Sometimes what the key factor is a person who's vulnerable. I just came back recently, not too long ago, from the Dominican Republic, where we have a large population of young girls that are trying to flee other countries like Venezuela, who are in really troubling times, and Colombia. And they're trying to get away and get jobs and get work into other countries. So these perpetrators, these traffickers, see these young women, sometimes young mothers who are 20 or 22 years old, and they offer them jobs, and then what they end up doing is turning around and taking them to a country like the Dominican Republic and putting them into prostitution and forcing them to work at it. And they're not children. They're, like I said, 20 or 22-year-old mothers, but their plight is still the same. They're stuck there, and sometimes in some of the countries, no one is coming for them. And it's a horrible feeling when you are in a foreign country, forced into something that's an absolute nightmare, and you're told every day that no one is coming for you. And even the older people sometimes, even generations of families, sometimes in some of the work and some of the slavery, or what they call bonded slavery, actually, or bonded labor, is actually just slavery. But sometimes it can be generations of families. You can owe a debt, like in India, a debt of $200 for medical bills or whatever. And so the promise is made that, I'll come to work for you, and I'll bring a couple of my family members, and we'll work off the debt, only to find an entire family trapped into this rice mill, brick kiln, rock quarry. I've seen it happen over and over again. And they work for years and years and years, not working off the debt.
Yeah. And can you help us understand, because I think perhaps maybe some of our brains, especially in our worlds, the people go, well, why didn't they just say, all right, well, I'll work for 1 month, and that will be the pay, and then that changes. Why doesn't that work like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, but we're so used to knowing and understanding how the world works. Yeah. But you got to remember, we're working in places where people don't have good schools. So much of the people we help are people that can't read and write, so to speak. They don't work with banks and understand finance. Right. And so many times that's why the predators prey upon those people, because they know that they can be easily manipulated. And so it seems like such a simple thing that we could figure out, but for them it's not. And you take this debt on, and you think, I'm going to work it off, and then you're just never let go. And the whole community typically sometimes is involved in it. Everyone's making money off of this person that nobody really cares about. Yeah. So no one is really motivated sometimes to get them out or let them go. Yeah. And we've had cases where these people will try and run away and run to the police, and the police are really good friends with the brick kiln owner or the rice mill owner or the whatever, or the brothel owner. And so they bring them right back to the same environment. And so it's at that point you can understand how they just try and survive. Okay, let's just survive. Yeah. And that's kind of how they get stuck in it for years.
Yeah, exactly. Can you share maybe, I definitely can't say favorite cases because that's just a far wrong word, but I suppose cases that brought you great joy to change the lives of somebody, or maybe they're just the really difficult cases that you need to share. I suppose specifically, it's sometimes painting a picture of one person really helps us understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'll tell you, it sounds like very dark and evil what we've been talking about, and it is, but you mentioned joy. There is a great joy behind it all. There is a hope that comes from it in the midst of it all if you choose to be a part of it. So it's definitely there. When you take someone out of this horrible condition, this horrible environment, this nightmare that has no hope at all of getting out, and you're able to work and against all the challenges and set them free, there is a joy behind it that's pretty incredible. And I'm sorry, what was the other part? It was
more just, I suppose, a specific example of somebody.
Yeah. I'll give you a great example of a young child named from southern India named J&T, because I can use her name. Her family owed a debt of about $150 for medical bills. So they went to a loaner, and he loaned them the money on the promise that the father of this little girl, that he would bring his family to work for him in his rock quarry in this huge, massive hole in the ground where it's all hand labor. So he agreed to it. And He was there 5 years. He brought his whole family. Eventually, the rock quarry owner demanded that he bring more people. So he did. And his daughter, who was 3 at the time they made this promise. And as a 3-year-old, she was put to work. It's hard to believe, but this is the facts. I was there. Our investigators found her and her family and were able to work with the police, do surveillance, gather enough information to convince the police of what was happening. And we've built relationships with the police, so we go there with the police, and we rescued them. 31 family members, including the girl who was now 8. She had been in that hole in the ground for 5 years. That was her existence. That was her reality. That's all she knew. Never been to school, obviously. And many of the family members, they were so in shock because they've just been in they don't even know what freedom is, really.
Yeah.
We have to train them on what it is. A woman had a baby there 4 days before we rescued them. A mother had a baby, got pregnant in the facility, and the owner wouldn't let her leave because he was afraid she was going to run away. So he made her have the baby in that hole in the ground. I tell you, in talking with this young girl, J&T, afterwards, it was a very emotional, very touching, very moving time. When you're there and you're standing in front of it and you're seeing somebody who's experiencing freedom for the first time, it's powerful. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I would. A corporate job that paid me $1 million a year, I wouldn't take it to replace this work. There's a joy that's more powerful.
That's great.
There in that.
V, one of the questions that pops into my mind is the struggle it must be in the work that you do in terms of having to build a case. And so knowing somebody is going through, hell on earth. And it might be that you need to leave them there for 2 years as you build a case. That must be agonizing and heartbreaking. And I would imagine guilt would be quite strong through that too, but I'm perhaps projecting. Could you take us through what it is like and how you, I suppose, handle that? It
is a tremendous struggle. And that's one of the worst parts, especially of being an investigator. You see these people in their worst nightmare. And honestly, you mentioned it earlier, there is sometimes this thought, let's just get a couple guys together, let's charge in there and let's take them out. We did an operation on Lake Volta in Ghana where we met some young boys that were just like, they're starving to death, little kids, and they're being forced to work and abused. And the thought actually crossed my colleague and I's mind. He's a special forces guy, and we talked about it once when we met this young slave boy named Gideon. We said, let's just go back and kill that guy, send him to the bottom of the lake, and we'll rescue Gideon. But really, that's taking things in our own hands. That thought is a thing we battle. And so that would have ruined any chance we have of building relations, building an MOU, and trying to get more boys out and getting the actual traffickers prosecuted. So that's just our selfish desire to go do it. And we have to recognize that there's a bigger bigger things at stake. And so we left him there. He was pleading with us, too, to take him away, behind the back of the slave owner, pleading with us. And it took us 2 years before we could do our first rescue. 2 years. But you know what happened is we rescued 10 boys on our first case, and we found him, and we rescued him. And he told my colleague who was there that day, he said, I didn't give up. I never gave up hope because I knew you would come back for me.
Wow.
And so part of this work we do is not just about the rescue. Others see it, and it gives them sometimes the hope just to survive, knowing that somebody is looking for me. And so oftentimes it's a long time. It's a long time in waiting, and that's part of the battle. But, I'll tell you personally, being a man of faith, those are things that we often have to turn over to God. My role in all of this is not to rescue every single slave. That is not my responsibility. My responsibility, my team's responsibility, is to be faithful. It's to show up and do the job and do it well and be there and to never give up and not give up. Not listen to the world that says it's too hard, it's too far away, it's too difficult, it costs too much. Those don't really exist. They're not important. All those things, listen to the voice that says that it's worth it. And don't give up, because there will be challenges. There's an enemy behind all this. But those are things, like I said, we give to God and we do our part.
Absolutely. If people want to support, and I'm assuming it's this is a not-for-profit organization, what's the best website for them to head to?
Well, I would say go to the website. And honestly, it is you can go and you can become a monthly supporter. You can give a one-time, but there's other ways to support it too. There's ways of organizing groups. I mean, what I usually tell a lot of young people is, first of all, foremost, make this an issue you care about. Make it an issue of your heart, not just about numbers and figures and news articles. Make it something that actually you care about and is deep within your heart.
Yeah.
And so the starting point for anyone would be to go to IGM's website, which is just www.igm.org.au if you're here in Australia.
Yeah, great.
Obviously. But that's a starting point. And make it, and once you get it in your heart that it's an issue you care about, I really believe that God will nudge you. You'll start to get a sense for it's important. I should listen to this news article. I should find out what's happening. Yeah. I should spread the word. I should help. Finance is always needed. Ultimately, it takes money. Yeah, I hate to say that, but it does. That's where I'll give you a classic example. Our anti-slavery work of young boys in Ghana, when we were out there in an undercover role trying to infiltrate this industry and find these slaves, I was talking with a slave owner about business together so we could find out the status.
Yeah.
And the slave owner, I asked him, I said, well, if I hire a bunch of boats and we work together, am I going to get in trouble with the police for having slave boys? And you know what he told me? He said, no, the police never come on the lake. There's no police on this lake. And I said, well, why wouldn't they come out here? And he goes, they're never here. So I had met and built a relationship with a high-ranking police official there in Accra, Ghana. And I asked her, a female, I said, why aren't you on the lake? You know what she said was, we don't own a boat. And the government will not give us the resources to buy a boat. That's just a classic example. That's a small financial matter, but it's a financial thing. Yeah. And so we bought him a boat. And that's one financial example of how finances, just simple, small things, sometimes make a huge difference. Yeah. So the police could actually go out and start doing rescues.
Just incredible.
Yeah.
V, we could, I reckon, literally talk for hours, both of us here. And unfortunately, we don't have all that time. Yeah. But I think you've given a great snapshot for people to say, hey, be thinking about it. When you hear a story, when you do whatever, like you said, and maybe even, as we said, you want to give, or maybe you want to start saying, well, actually, maybe I should be doing something. Check out that website, ijm.org.au is the one that we need to head to and find out all the more details. We so appreciate your time. Thank you for the work that you are doing.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate you having a chat.
I'll come back anytime you call me.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
It's a deal. Thanks.
Okay.
Fathers, if you're struggling to connect with your son or desire to strengthen your bond, here's a great opportunity. The Royal Hood Father and Son Camp is a bonding experience like no other, hosted by Eric Argerman in partnership with Dr. Alan Meyer from Valiant Man. Empower your son for manhood through unforgettable memories and faith-filled moments that will define his future. Secure your place for April 7 to 9 at CYC Adventure Resort, Phillip Island. Visit fatherandsoncamp.com.